When did you learn what your innocent child was truly capable of? My first time picking my stepdaughter Violet up from school, I arrived 15 minutes early, but Principal Davidson was already waiting for me. There was a serious incident with Violette during state testing today. My stomach dropped thinking something happened to her. Violet deliberately triggered Ms. Baring's epileptic seizure. She used a strobe light app on her face. EMTs just cleared Ms. Baring, but she's demanding expulsion. My brain short-circuited. This made no sense. Even I knew about Ms. Baring's photosensitive epilepsy. She'd made it her whole personality. While walking to the office, Ms. Baring herself intercepted us in the hallway, her husband supporting her arm. Your daughter tried to murder me. 20 students watched her flash that light. We're pressing charges. Her husband held medical papers like evidence. His jaw clenched. My hands trembled. Violet had never hurt anyone. She once cried over stepping on an ant. Just last week she'd made me pull over to save a worm from the sidewalk. Through the office glass, I saw her in that massive leather chair. Her special needs lanyard twisted, but her face had this look that told me there was something the teachers weren't saying. We walked in and Davidson started speaking, but Ms. Baring exploded over him. This manipulative monster planned this. She's disturbed. Violent. You locked me in a box, Violet said loud and clear. Dead silence. What? I turned to Ms. Baring. Her face had gone white. The calm down corner is... Baring started. It's not a corner. Violet interrupted her and stood on the chair. It's a refrigerator box. A cardboard box that a fridge comes in. She makes me crawl inside during every single test. Then she tapes it shut with duct tape. Not just the top, but around and around the whole box so I can't push out anywhere. Then she drags it into the supply closet and locks the door. Her husband's grip on Ms. Baring's arm loosened. What's she talking about? I can't breathe through the tiny air hole she left in the box, Violet continued. I scream and scream, but she tells the class I'm having a tantrum and to ignore it. Sometimes I wet myself because she won't let me out for bathroom breaks. Then I have to sit in it. Ms. Baring's voice shrank. That's not true. I call Sarah from my class, Violet said. She's in after school. Ask her. Davidson looked like he didn't want to. That's when I leaned forward. I'm a lawyer. Call the girl or we're all sitting here filing paperwork until midnight. 5 minutes later, Sarah entered, saw Mr. Baring, and pressed herself against the wall in terror. Can you please tell us about the boxes? I said gently. Sarah looked at Ms. Baring in fear, then back at me. There's a refrigerator box for Violet, dishwasher box for Joseph. Chris had one too. You can go, Davidson said right after. Sarah just fled. Ms. Baring's husband stepped away from her. You trap kids in boxes. Joseph was in his box 23 minutes this morning. Violet's voice got louder. 9:15 to 9:38. I watch the clock every second. He has this thing called claustrophobia. Small places scare him. He said it in class. But you got the smaller dishwasher box. You folded his legs up against his chest to fit him in the box. Jesus Christ, her husband muttered. He screamed, I can't breathe, over and over. Then he threw up. It had nowhere to go in that tiny space. He was choking on it. He peed himself. The smell came through my air hole. Other kids were crying listening to him. He went completely quiet after 15 minutes. Mr. Baring backed against the wall. Behavioral modifications were approved. I thought he was dying, Violet said, when Joseph went silent. That's when I did it. You told us one day camera flashes trigger your seizures, so I ran to you and used the app on my phone in your face, over and over. I did it until you couldn't hurt Joseph anymore. Where's Joseph? I asked. Hospital. Violet stared at Ms. Baring. The janitor heard me screaming that Joseph was dead. He cut him out with a box cutter. His lips were blue. His nose had vomit in it. Ms. Baring slid down the wall. Her husband backed toward the door, face twisted with disgust. You've been torturing children? Chris last year moved schools after you kept him in a box for 3 hours, Violet continued. His parents thought he was lying. Dexter too. Lacey doesn't speak anymore. Sarah's sister Emily is in mental hospital. You're sick, Ms. Baring's husband told her. You're actually sick. He turned to me. Can we file charges against her for this? Surely we can write. Ms. Baring was crying now. But the class average test scores got me higher bonuses. Bonuses! Her husband's scream cut her off. You think money is worth torturing kids? We own 8 cars, what more do you need? Davidson stood abruptly. I need to check that closet. The second he left, Ms. Baring literally crawled forward on her knees. Please, I'll drop charges, I'll resign. Her husband grabbed his coat. Don't come home. I'm going to my buddy's place. The door slammed. Ms. Baring continued to sob, but I didn't even respond because this horrible realization washed over me. Violet, I turned to her. You told me your mom knows everything that happens in your school. Her eyes went wide. Does mom know about what Ms. Baring was doing? Violet's eyes immediately started watering, almost as if I just found out something I wasn't supposed to. She nodded real slow, tears rolling down her face, and my whole world just cracked apart right there in that office. I pulled her into my arms while Mizzy Baring kept sobbing on the floor like some kind of broken animal, and Violet pressed her face into my chest, shaking so hard I could feel it through my shirt. You did nothing wrong, I kept telling her over and over while my brain tried to process that my wife, the woman I'd been married to for 3 years, the kids were being stuffed into boxes and taped shut and never said a word to me about it. Davidson came back through the door carrying 3 big flat pieces of cardboard that used to be boxes, duct tape still stuck all over them in thick silver strips, and his hands shook as he held them up to show me the air holes somebody had cut with what looked like a knife or scissors, just these tiny slits maybe 2 inches long. The refrigerator box had Violet's name written on it in black marker. The dishwasher box said Joseph, and there was a microwave box with Chris crossed out and Dexter written above it. I took out my phone with one hand while still holding Violet and texted my wife that we needed to talk the second I got home. Something serious happened at the school, and she texted back immediately asking if the situation had been handled quietly and if anyone was making a fuss. That response made my stomach turn because it wasn't asking if Violet was okay or what happened, just whether it was quiet. Davidson pulled me aside while Violet sat back down in the chair, and he told me the district office had approved something called alternative behavioral interventions for special needs students, but nobody ever checked what that actually meant in the classroom, and now he had to call an emergency board meeting for tonight because this was going to explode. Ms. Baring had crawled to the corner and just sat there rocking back and forth, and Davidson told her she needed to leave the building immediately and not come back until further notice. I picked up Violet and carried her out to my car, even though she's 9 and usually says she's too old for that, but she wrapped her arms around my neck and didn't let go until I put her in the back seat. During the drive home, she started talking real quiet about how her mom told her the boxes were special quiet spaces that helped kids think better and focus on their work, and that other parents wouldn't understand because they didn't know about special teaching methods. She said her mom told her not to mention it to me because I might get confused since I wasn't a teacher and didn't understand education stuff. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white because now I understood why Violet never told me, even though we'd gotten really close over the past year since I married her mom. When we got home, my wife was already in defense mode, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, saying Violet must have misunderstood their conversations, that she thought it was just a timeout corner like they have in lots of classrooms, nothing serious or harmful. But I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Davidson had sent me of those flattened boxes with the tape and the tiny air holes, and her face went completely pale. She sat down heavy in the kitchen chair and admitted she knew they used boxes sometimes, but thought they were bigger and that kids could get out if they really needed to, not that they were taped shut and locked in closets. I told her I needed space to think about all this and grabbed my pillow and some blankets to sleep in the guest room. And when Violet knocked on the door an hour later, asking if she could sleep in there with me, because she was scared, I made a little bed for her on the floor with extra pillows, and she fell asleep holding my hand hanging off the side of the bed. The next morning at 6:30, my phone rang, and it was Joseph's parents who'd somehow gotten my number, probably from the school directory, and his dad's voice was shaking with rage as he told me they'd been at the hospital all night, and Joseph had a panic attack, so bad when he woke up that they had to sedate him. They knew I was a lawyer from the school events, and wanted to file charges against everyone involved, including any parents who knew what was happening and didn't report it, which made my chest tight because that might include my own wife. His mom got on the phone crying and said Joseph told them everything about the boxes. There's something deeply unsettling about how quickly everyone's stories start falling apart once Violet speaks up. Ms. Baring goes from demanding expulsion to literally crawling on her knees begging. The principal suddenly remembers to check the closet only after everything comes out, and how long it had been going on. Months and months of being folded up and taped inside whenever there was a test or quiz, and they wanted to sue the school district, Ms. Baring personally, and anyone else who let this happen to their son. I told them I'd help however I could, but that I might have a conflict of interest, and they said they didn't care. They just wanted someone who understood what happened and would fight for the kids. I had to explain that I couldn't take their case because of the conflict, but gave them my colleague's number who specialized in education law. And Joseph's dad grabbed my hand so hard it hurt, and said their son wouldn't go into any small spaces now, not even his bedroom closet, and had panic attacks every time they tried to get him in the car. The drive home felt like hours, with Violet sitting in the back seat drawing on her tablet, and when we got there, my wife was already in the kitchen making dinner like nothing had happened. She put plates down and started talking about how Ms. Baring had told her months ago that this was an approved technique for special needs kids who couldn't handle testing environments, and pulled out her phone to show me emails from a parent support group where other moms were discussing containment strategies for difficult children. I pushed the plate away and asked her point blank if she knew Violet was taped inside cardboard boxes, and she said it was just a calm down space, that lots of schools use them, that I didn't understand because I wasn't there every day dealing with Violet's issues. Violet dropped her fork and ran upstairs, and my wife kept scrolling through her phone showing me links to articles about sensory rooms and quiet corners, like that was the same thing as being sealed in a refrigerator box with duct tape. The next morning she made pancakes and tried to act normal, but I couldn't look at her, and when the doorbell rang at 2 that afternoon, it was Lori Shoren from CPS with a folder and a serious expression. She needed to interview Violet privately as part of the mandatory investigation, and my wife started pacing outside the living room door while I sat at the kitchen table listening to the muffled voices through the wall. After 40 minutes, Lori came out and told us she was opening a formal case and that Violet couldn't be left alone with her mother pending the investigation, which made my wife start sobbing and screaming that I was ruining our family over nothing. Lori handed me paperwork and said someone would be in touch within 72 hours, and my wife threw a glass against the wall after she left. I called my boss and took emergency family leave while my wife packed bags and moved to her sister's place across town, and the house felt weird and quiet without her constant noise. Violet seemed lighter somehow, singing in the shower and actually eating full meals instead of picking at her food, and she started telling me things she'd never mentioned before about school. 3 days later, Detective Jackie Kingston called and said they needed Violet's formal statement at the Children's Advocacy Center, and mentioned 4 more families had come forward with similar stories about their kids being put in boxes. The Advocacy Center had toys and bright colors, but Violet ignored everything and sat at the table with paper and markers drawing the inside of the box, while the interviewer asked gentle questions. She drew the darkness with black marker pressing so hard it tore through the paper, and showed where the air hole was, and how she could see a tiny bit of light from the closet door crack, and the interviewer took photos of every drawing. On the way home, Violet asked if she'd have to see her mom again, and I didn't know what to tell her, so I just said we'd figure it out together. That evening, my wife's lawyer called about arranging supervised visitation, and the fact that she already had a lawyer before CPS even finished their initial assessment told me she knew exactly how serious this was all along. I went to our shared computer to forward the lawyer's email to my colleague, and found a folder labeled school stuff that I'd never noticed before, with dozens of saved emails between my wife and Ms. Baring going back 6 months. They discussed Violet's behavioral challenges and necessary interventions, and my wife kept asking about ways to improve her test scores because the district was threatening to move Violet to a different school if her numbers didn't improve. One email from my wife said whatever it takes to help her succeed on the state tests, and Ms. Baring replied that she had effective methods that guarantee compliance and had used them successfully with other difficult students. There were photos attached of the boxes, actual photos Ms. Baring had sent my wife, showing the refrigerator box and dishwasher box in the supply closet, like she was proud of them, and my wife had replied with a thumbs up emoji. The next morning, I got a call from the school district office saying they needed me to come in immediately for an important meeting about the situation. When I arrived at the district building 20 minutes later, there were already 3 news vans parked outside with reporters setting up cameras on the sidewalk. Inside the conference room, the superintendent sat at the head of the table with 2 lawyers, and the district's PR person, all looking stressed and tired. They told me Ms. Baring had been terminated effective immediately and banned from all school property forever. The superintendent kept insisting that no administrators knew about the boxes, even though I'd already seen emails between Davidson and my wife discussing the whole thing from months ago. They wanted me to sign papers saying I wouldn't sue the district or talk to the media, but I just stood up and walked out without signing anything. Outside, Joseph's parents were already talking to the reporters, his dad holding up medical papers while his mom cried next to him. The hospital records showed Joseph had suffered oxygen deprivation and something called acute stress disorder from being trapped in that box for so long. The reporters were recording everything, as Joseph's dad explained how his son still couldn't sleep without all the lights on and had panic attacks whenever he saw cardboard boxes. That night, the story was all over the local news, with the headline, "Teacher Traps Special Needs Students in Boxes," running on every channel. My phone started ringing non-stop with parents from Violet's class class, wanting to know if their kids had been in boxes too. Around midnight, Violet woke up screaming, soaked in sweat and shaking so hard I could barely hold her. She'd wet the bed, which hadn't happened in years, and kept crying that she couldn't breathe, that the walls were closing in on her. This happened again 2 nights later, and I knew we needed professional help fast. I found a child psychologist named Kathy Rupert, who specialized in trauma recovery, and got Violet an emergency appointment for the next day. During the first session, Kathy had me wait outside while she talked to Violet, alone, for an hour. When she called me back in, her face was serious as she explained what Violet had told her. My wife would give Violet candy after what she called box days, and tell her she was being so brave and strong for handling it. Kathy said this was textbook grooming behavior, using rewards to normalize abuse, and make the child think they were doing something good by enduring it. She said Violet had been conditioned to accept the abuse as normal, and even feel proud of surviving it. That's when my phone started buzzing with text from a number I didn't recognize. It was my wife's sister begging me to answer, because my wife had locked herself in the bathroom with a bottle of pills threatening to kill herself. She wanted me to drop everything and come help, but I told her to call 911 and get my wife professional help because my priority was protecting Violet. She called me heartless and said family should come first, but I hung up and turned my phone off. The next morning, a lawyer from the district showed up at my door with a briefcase full of papers and a check for $50,000. He said they wanted to settle quietly with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent us from ever talking about what happened. I didn't even let him finish his pitch before telling him we weren't interested in their money and to get off my property. He left the check on my doorstep anyway, but I mailed it back to the district office that same day. A week later, the janitor who had cut Joseph out of the box contacted me saying he had something important to show me. He'd saved security footage from the hallway camera that showed Ms. Baring dragging the boxes into the supply closet multiple times over several months. The timestamp on the Joseph incident showed he was actually in the box for 27 minutes, not the 23 Violet had counted, because the video started recording before Violet could see the clock from her box. Detective Kingston called me that afternoon to say they were adding child endangerment charges to the case, and the DA, Lynn Wirtz, wanted to pursue felony counts that could mean serious prison time for Ms. Baring. She said they had enough evidence between the videos, the emails, and testimony from multiple students to build a strong case. 2 nights later, around 11 p.m., I heard loud banging on the front door and someone screaming my name over and over. Through the peephole, I could see my wife stumbling around drunk, mascara running down her face, yelling that I stole her daughter and ruined her life. I told Violet to go hide in her room and lock the door while I called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes and arrested her for violating the protective order, having to practically carry her to the patrol car because she was so drunk she couldn't walk straight. She spent the night in jail, and her mugshot appeared online the next morning, showing her disheveled hair and smeared makeup. Why does the wife already have a lawyer ready before CPS even finishes looking into things? The timing feels odd to me. Most people don't just have lawyers on speed dial unless they know something bad is coming their way. By noon, her marketing firm had fired her, sending an email saying they couldn't have someone facing criminal charges representing their company. Her sister picked her up from jail the next morning while I was making breakfast for Violet, who kept pushing eggs around her plate without eating them. That evening at dinner, Violet finally looked up from her mac and cheese and asked me if her mom was a bad person. I set down my fork and thought about how to answer, while she waited with those big eyes watching me. I told her that good people sometimes make really bad choices when they're scared or confused, that being a good person isn't about never making mistakes, but about trying to fix them when you do. She nodded slowly and went back to eating, but I could see her thinking about it, processing everything that had happened. 3 weeks later, we sat in the packed courtroom for the first hearing with Ms. Baring at the defendant's table, in a gray suit looking nothing like the confident teacher who terrorized those kids. The prosecutor stood and read the charges out loud, while parents in the gallery started crying, some holding each other as they heard the official allegations about what their children had gone through. Ms. Baring pleaded not guilty to all 23 counts of child abuse and endangerment, while her lawyer argued for dismissal based on lack of physical evidence since the boxes had been thrown away. The judge denied the motion and set a trial date for 6 months out, ordering Ms. Baring to surrender her teaching license immediately and have no contact with any minors, including her own nieces and nephews. That night, my phone rang and it was my wife's parents calling from Florida. Her mother sobbing so hard her father had to take the phone and explain they'd just seen everything on the news. They couldn't believe their daughter knew about this and offered to fly up immediately to help with Violet, saying they'd already booked tickets for the next morning. I told them we'd appreciate the support, and they arrived the next day with suitcases and groceries, her mother immediately wrapping Violet in a hug that lasted 5 minutes. 2 days later, we drove to the CPS office for the supervised visit, where my wife would see Violet for the first time since the arrest. The social worker led us to a plain room with cameras in the corners, where my wife was already waiting at a plastic table, her hands shaking as Violet walked in. She started crying immediately and told Violet she was so sorry, that she'd made terrible mistakes and understood if Violet hated her. Violet didn't say anything, just sat down and pulled out her coloring book and crayons, spending the entire hour filling in a picture of a butterfly while her mother cried and the social worker took notes. On the drive home, Violet asked if we could stop for ice cream, and we sat in the car eating chocolate cones while she told me the butterfly was for Joseph, because butterflies mean transformation and healing. The next morning, I drove to my lawyer's office and filed for emergency custody and divorce simultaneously after finding out through the prosecutor that my wife had contacted Ms. Baring's lawyer about coordinating their defense strategies. The betrayal felt like a knife in my chest as I signed paper after paper, my lawyer explaining that the coordination attempt would help our custody case significantly. That same afternoon, the local news reported that Principal Davidson had resigned suddenly after emails surfaced, showing he'd told Ms. Baring to, quote, handle problems discreetly, unquote, when parents complained about her methods. The school board held an emergency meeting that night, promising a full investigation into who knew what and when, with parents demanding answers about how this could happen for so long. During Violet's next therapy session, she told Kathy about trying to tell her mom multiple times about the boxes, but being told she was being dramatic and making things up for attention. Kathy explained to me afterward that this was classic invalidation of abuse victims and would need extensive work to help Violet trust adults again. She gave me worksheets to do with Violet at home about identifying trusted adults and understanding that she deserved to be believed when something bad happened to her. 3 days later, the prosecutor called to tell me that 3 teachers had come forward, admitting they'd heard children crying from the supply closet, but Ms. Baring had told them it was approved by administration for special needs students. They were all placed on administratively pending investigation, while the union scrambled to distance itself from them, releasing a statement about their commitment to student safety. The teachers claimed they thought it was legitimate because Davidson had signed off on Ms. Baring's behavior modification education plan, but nobody could find any actual documentation of approval. Meanwhile, Joseph's family filed a civil lawsuit naming the school district, Ms. Baring, and quote, complicit parents, unquote, as defendants, seeking damages for medical costs and trauma. The process server showed up at my wife's sister's house with the papers, which specifically named her as someone who knew about and enabled the abuse through the parent committee. During discovery for that case, the lawyer found emails showing my wife was on a parent advisory committee that met with Ms. Baring monthly to discuss classroom management. The emails revealed she'd helped fundraise for classroom supplies, including purchasing the refrigerator and dishwasher boxes, even suggesting they get sturdy ones that would, quote, last the whole school year, unquote. The worst part was seeing those purchase orders with my wife's signature right next to the box dimensions. 3 weeks later, I took Violet to her first therapy session at the county mental health center. The therapist had this big room with art supplies everywhere and told me to wait outside. 20 minutes in, I heard this crash and then screaming. I ran in to find Violet throwing chunks of clay at the wall while the therapist just sat there calmly taking notes. She was screaming that moms are supposed to protect kids, not help teachers hurt them. The therapist nodded at me to leave them alone, so I went back to the waiting room. An hour later, Violet came out with red eyes and clay under her fingernails, but she grabbed my hand tighter than she ever had before. That same afternoon, the district attorney's office called about Ms. Baring's case. The prosecutor said they'd offered her 18 months if she testified about who else knew about the boxes. Her lawyer was considering it, but wanted to negotiate down to 12 months. I told them 18 months wasn't enough for torturing kids, but they said it was better than risking trial where she might get nothing. 2 days later, we had our own court hearing about custody. The judge ordered my wife to undergo a mental health evaluation before any unsupervised visits with Violet. The evaluator spent 3 hours with her and another hour interviewing me. His report came back saying she showed narcissistic tendencies and had trouble accepting responsibility for her actions. He recommended at least 6 months of therapy before considering unsupervised contact. My wife's lawyer tried arguing the evaluation was biased, but the judge sided with the evaluator. That weekend, I had to pack up our house because the divorce meant selling it. Violet helped me wrap dishes in newspaper while I tried explaining why we were moving to a smaller apartment across town. She just shrugged and said she didn't care as long as the doors didn't lock from the outside. That hit me hard. She'd been checking every door in our house since the box incident, making sure none could trap her. The new apartment had regular doorknobs she could open from inside, which seemed to calm her down. Ms. Baring took the plea deal the following Monday. Her lawyer submitted a list of 23 people who knew about the boxes, including 7 parents, 4 teachers, 2 administrators, and the school counselor. My wife's name was highlighted with documentation showing she attended monthly meetings where Ms. Baring discussed her classroom management techniques. There were even meeting minutes where my wife suggested getting industrial tape because regular duct tape wasn't strong enough. Meanwhile, the news broke that the school district settled Joseph's family lawsuit. Nobody would confirm the amount, but a source at the courthouse said it was over $2 million. Joseph's dad posted on social media that they were moving to another state to start fresh. His post had a picture of Joseph smiling for the first time since the incident, but you could see he still had dark circles under his eyes. The criminal cases started moving faster after that. My wife's lawyer negotiated a plea deal where she'd plead guilty to child endangerment in exchange for avoiding trial. She got 2 years probation and mandatory parenting classes, plus supervised visits only for at least a year. The judge made it clear any violation would mean immediate jail time. She had to stand there while the judge read the charges, including knowingly contributing to the psychological torture of minors. Her face stayed blank the whole time, like she still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Ms. Baring's sentencing happened a month later. She tried telling the judge she was just trying to help special needs kids succeed academically. The judge, this older woman named Jo Softglin, actually interrupted her and called her actions unconscionable torture disguised as education. She said no test score was worth destroying children's mental health. Ms. Baring started crying, but the judge wasn't having it. Then came Violet's turn to testify. They set up a video link so she didn't have to be in the same room as Ms. Baring. Violet sat in a small office at the courthouse with just me and a victim advocate, while her image appeared on the courtroom screen. Something feels odd about Ms. Baring's plea deal listing exactly 23 people who knew about the boxes. That's such a specific number that makes me wonder if there's documentation we're not hearing about yet. She described being trapped in the box, how dark it was, how she couldn't breathe properly through the tiny air hole. She talked about wetting herself because Ms. Baring wouldn't let her out for bathroom breaks. Several jurors were wiping their eyes when she described listening to Joseph screaming and thinking he was dying. The prosecutor asked her how it affected her now, and she said she still had nightmares about being trapped. Ms. Baring got 2 years in state prison, plus lifetime prohibition from working with children. Her teaching license was permanently revoked in all 50 states. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution to all the affected families, though we knew she'd probably declare bankruptcy to avoid it. After the sentencing, other parents started coming forward about similar things at different schools. The news hit 3 weeks later when the local paper ran a front-page story about the district superintendent cleaning out his office at 2 in the morning. Security footage showed him loading boxes into his truck, while the 2 board members who'd approved Ms. Baring's behavioral modification program did the same thing at their offices across town. The independent investigation report came out that Monday, and it was bad, really bad, showing they'd known about the boxes for 2 years and covered it up to protect test score bonuses. They all resigned before lunch, but the prosecutor said there wasn't enough evidence for criminal charges since they hadn't directly hurt any kids themselves. My lawyer handled the divorce papers while all this was happening, and my ex fought me on nothing. Not custody, not the house, not even child support, even though she'd lost her teaching job. The judge gave me full custody, with her getting supervised visits every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the Family Services Center. She had to pay $800 a month in support, which seemed crazy since she was unemployed, but the judge said her teaching degree meant she could find work. Violet started seeing Kathy twice a week at first, and the nightmares were terrible. She'd wake up screaming about being trapped, and I'd find her wedged behind her dresser trying to hide. We had to take all the doors off the closets because she'd panic if she saw them closed. The nightlight stayed on 24/7, and she slept with 6 stuffed animals arranged around her like guards. After 3 months, she made friends with another kid from her class who'd been in the boxes too, and they'd color together during lunch at their new school. My ex finished her parenting classes after 4 months, and the court said she could have unsupervised afternoon visits. Violet came home from the first one and went straight to her room without eating dinner. The second visit, she came back with her nails bitten down to nothing. The third time, she asked if she really had to go, and when I said the court ordered it, she just nodded and got in my ex's car. 6 months after everything started, we went to a support group meeting in the church basement downtown. 12 families sat in that that circle, and one dad talked about finding his son sleeping in the bathtub because it was the only place he felt safe. Another mom said her daughter hadn't spoken a single word since the boxes. A grandfather cried talking about his grandson, who tried to hurt himself because he thought he deserved to be locked up. The district announced new policies the next month, with cameras going in every classroom and monthly welfare checks, but nobody believed they'd actually follow through. Parents packed a meeting demanding real change, not just promises on paper. That's when Violet stood up at the microphone, even though she was shaking, so hard I could hear it in her voice. She told them kids needed adults who would listen when they said something was wrong, not just test scores and awards on the wall. The room went dead quiet when she sat down. A week later, my ex's letter showed up. 4 pages of her taking responsibility for choosing her career over Violet's safety. She wrote about being in intensive therapy, trying to understand why she ignored the warning signs. She said she knew sorry wasn't enough, but she needed Violet to know she was trying to change. I let Violet read it, and she folded it up and put it in her desk drawer without saying anything. The news about Ms. Baring came from another parent whose cousin worked at the women's prison upstate. Some inmate found out what she did to kids and went after her in the lunch line with a sharpened toothbrush. Ms. Baring spent 3 weeks in the medical ward with a punctured lung and broken ribs. The guards moved her to protective custody after that, but everyone knew it was just a matter of time before someone else got to her. A full year passed, and Violet was doing better at her new school, where her IEP specifically said no isolation ever for any reason. She still saw Kathy every week, but only on Wednesdays now. The nightmares mostly stopped, except when it stormed, because the thunder reminded her of Ms. Baring pounding on the box when she wanted quiet. Her new teacher sent home notes about how well she was doing in reading, and how she helped other kids with their math. We even got a small dog named Buddy, who slept on her bed and followed her everywhere around the house. The other families from the support group started a non-profit to push for state laws against isolation punishment. Some reporter from the city paper wanted to do a big story about everything, but most parents said no because they just wanted their kids to heal without more attention. About 3 months after that, my ex-wife filed papers asking for overnight visits with Violet, which meant we had to go back to court and meet with the guardian ad litem who'd been assigned to our case. The guardian spent 2 hours alone with Violet in a small room with toys and books, while I waited outside pacing the hallway and checking my phone every 30 seconds. When they came out, Violet went straight to me and grabbed my hand while the guardian wrote notes on her clipboard. The next week at the hearing, the judge read the guardian's report out loud and said Violet had been very clear that she wasn't ready for overnights yet, so the court would keep the current schedule of supervised day visits for another 6 months. My ex-wife's lawyer argued for a bit, but the judge held firm and scheduled our next review for January. I was pushing my cart through the produce section at the grocery store about a week later when someone called my name, and I turned to see Ms. Baring's ex-husband standing there with a woman and a baby in their cart. He walked over and apologized for not seeing what his ex-wife was doing to those kids, said he still had nightmares about finding out what she'd done in that classroom. His new wife rubbed his back while he talked, and the baby played with a toy attached to the cart handle. He told me he'd gotten remarried last year, and they'd just had their first kid together, and he was making sure to be involved in every school thing from now on. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before going our separate ways, but I could tell he was still carrying guilt about the whole thing. Time kept moving forward, and before I knew it, 2 whole years had passed since that day I picked Violet up from the school and learned about the boxes. The school district had a big assembly where they gave out awards for different essays kids had written, and Violet won first place for her piece about speaking up when you see something wrong happening. She stood at the podium in front of hundreds of people and dedicated her award to Joseph and all the other kids who'd been hurt but were too scared to say anything. Joseph was there in the front row with his parents, and he stood up and clapped when she said his name, and I saw his mom wiping tears from her face. After the ceremony, parents kept coming up to thank Violet for being brave enough to speak out, and she handled it all with more grace than most adults would have. My ex-wife and I had figured out a way to co-parent by then, though we'd never trust each other the same way again. She picked Violet up every other weekend now, and they were slowly building something different from what they'd had before. Not the same mother-daughter thing, but maybe something that could work for them. Violet would come back from those weekends tired, but not upset anymore, and she'd tell me little things about what they did together, like going to the movies or trying new restaurants. The school district kept dealing with fallout as more families came forward about things that had happened in previous years with other teachers who'd used similar methods. 3 more lawsuits got filed, and the state education department launched this huge investigation into how testing pressure was making teachers do crazy things to boost their scores. Local news kept calling for interviews, but most of us just wanted to move on and let our kids heal without cameras in their faces. One afternoon, while Violet was doing homework at the kitchen table, she looked up and asked if she could legally change her last name to mine when she turned 14. I told her we could definitely talk about it when the time came, and that I was really honored she'd even want to consider it. She smiled and went back to her math problems, but I had to go to the bathroom and splash cold water on my face because I was getting emotional about it. A few weeks later, I got a call from a parent I didn't know whose kid was showing signs of trauma from stuff happening with a different teacher at a different school. I gave them my lawyer colleague's number and told them about the support group that still met every month at the community center. They thanked me over and over, and I could hear the same fear in their voice that I'd felt 2 years ago when everything started. Tonight, Violet's at her mom's place for the weekend, and she just texted me goodnight with a little heart emoji like she always does now. We're not completely okay yet, and maybe we'll never be the same as we were before. All this happened, but we're surviving and moving forward, and right now that feels like enough. Thanks for sticking with me through all my wondering and questioning. It's definitely been a ride exploring this together. Until we meet again, like the video, it helps more than you think.